Well, hi, everyone. I am Daniel Williams, Senior Editor at MGMA and host of the MGMA Podcast Network. And we're welcoming someone I like to call a friend here at MGMA. That is Les Jebsen. We have connected on webinars, panels, all kinds of different ways, but I'm not sure that we've ever had Les on the podcast, and I don't know how that happened, but wow, let me just give a quick update, and then I'm going to let Les jump in and tell even more. But Les and I connected when he was still in Texas, and he has since moved to South Carolina, but he's currently regional administrator at Prisma Health. He also is a fellow with MGMA and the American College of Healthcare Executives. And I'll just say this, I'm going to put a plug in here for Les. One, we both are huge college sports fans and sports fans in general, but we've had vested in investments in with family members in doing things in college sports recently, and that's been really cool to catch up on that. So without further ado, Les, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, brother. Good to be here.
Yeah. So we won't stay here too long, but just tell us what your connection is to college sports currently.
Yeah, well, I've gotten probably one of the best jobs in America. I work in the orthopedics and sports medicine service line for Prisma Health out in South Carolina, and so I work for close to 200 advanced practice providers and physicians across the state, and we care for pretty much all of the high schools, colleges, and professional programs outside of Charleston. Everything else we care for. So Clemson athletics in the ACC and the University of South Carolina athletics in the SEC. We've got the AAA Boston Red Sox. We've got the Kansas City Royals clubs and golf tournaments and teams and everything in between. So it's a wonderful job. I'm very blessed to have it.
That is so neat. And now you were bashful about this, but you may have a progeny that is doing something in college sports right now. Is this correct, or am I making this up?
No, you're right. Yeah, so we're I've been blessed as well with some great athletes. My daughter was an NCAA volleyball player, and she's graduated, and my son was a football player at Texas A&M, and he's transferred. And then my daughter is a senior in high school, and she won the South Carolina State volleyball title. So,
wow.
I take 100% credit for having just, being the pillar of health and fitness and elite athletes. No, kidding. I just been very lucky, to be honest with you. So didn't even know anything about volleyball before my girls got into it. So.
What a blessing. What a blessing. Well, that is so exciting. I know as big a sports fan as you are, that's been so neat to get to experience that also through those children as well. So that's really cool. So the reason, I love catching up with you, and you and I literally could talk sports for a couple of podcasts, but we won't bore our audience with that. So we'll move on. You are going to be speaking on a really interesting topic. You're going to be speaking. You correct me if I'm wrong. You're going to be speaking at the MGMA Financial Conference coming up. Is that correct?
Yep.
And then you're also going to be speaking in our digital event, our MGMA Summit. That'll be in June. The topic, I believe, is the same. It's new medical equipment, buy or not to buy. So tell us a little bit about that. Where did this particular presentation come from? Where did that kernel come from?
Well, believe it or not, it's not necessarily the sexiest of topics historically. When we're all, flush with money and financial constraints where it is challenging, you didn't really think that much about it. And I've been fortunate to work and travel, all over the country professionally and work with colleagues in small to large medical groups, independent groups to large health system, hospital employed groups. And there's always been sort of a graveyard of equipment that has been put into a exam room or storage room or down the hallways of the ORs and what have you. And we came out of the pandemic, we're all cash strained. And so I just wanted to share some of the lessons I've learned. So I'm not any financial guru on medical equipment, but I've learned some hard lessons along the way. And that's what I want to do in this session is go, look, I'm going to give you objectively all of the things you really need to be thinking about if you're going to buy, lease, or rent a piece of medical equipment. There's a lot of things to think about, and here's some of that. And one of the other things I like to do is, after the presentation is done, just put some toolkit, I call them toolkit links and resources inside the talk, so participants can, have those resources well beyond what the conference in April. So, yeah, looking forward to going out and spending an hour with our friends and colleagues through the MGMA and hopefully sharing some insight.
That is so exciting. So let's break that down. You talked about just the finances in general is an immediate challenge, but what are some of those other challenges a practice administrator or decision maker might face when deciding on whether to invest in new medical equipment or not?
Well, it starts with the big takeaway is, what is the value proposition of the piece of equipment you're looking at? And is it going to become obsolete any time? Or is a change in employees and the knowledge base that companies have, or change in your clinicians or physicians that may utilize that piece of equipment, are they apt to change it all in a short period of time? Now, when I say short period of time, I'm saying 1 to 3 years. So those are some of the initial things to think about. When I say the value proposition, are we looking at getting a piece of equipment that is clinically necessary? We have to get this as part of the type of care that we're providing in our medical practice. Is it a revenue generating opportunity, an ancillary revenue generating opportunity? How long do we plan on using it before it becomes obsolete? I've seen physicians who they pressed the medical practice to get a piece of equipment, and they either leave themselves, or if they don't leave, they decide they don't want to use it anymore, and it ends up in the proverbial medical exam room graveyard. And so, I just want to share with colleagues ways that we can mitigate that together, objectively.
Let's talk about that then. I don't want to give away the entire session because we're not going to be here for an hour. But some of the high level stuff, what are some of those strategic decisions that decision maker needs to be looking at before deciding we're going to buy this, we're going to lease this? I mean, what are some of those boxes to tick to really set things straight for them?
Yeah, well, with our limited time, I will tell you that really there's I run through a checklist of considerations. What qualifies as a capital piece of equipment is variable from organization to organization. So let's agree on what is defined as a piece of capital equipment. And then benefits, the pros and cons of outright purchasing. Once you purchase that asset, you own it outright. You don't have any payments on it. But there are a slew of benefits behind purchasing a piece of capital equipment. Or is it better to lease that piece of equipment? And what are the implications, the pros and cons for leasing that piece of equipment? And then finally, I talk about the emergence of capital consumable agreements, which can be fairly complicated and have compliance implications associated with them, but seem to be fairly in vogue with many medical practices coming out of the pandemic and wanting to preserve capital. So I lastly go into detail on the capital consumable agreement.
When we talk about some of the software and the AI tools that are out there, those are progressing and evolving rapidly. When we're talking about that physical equipment that you're talking about, I mean, is there a chance, that you're going to buy it and then it's obsolete in a year or two? What is kind of the lifespan of the equipment that we're talking about here, so you feel really good about buying it and then you're going to be using it for several years and get your money back there?
So I think I'm going to become a bit of a dinosaur with this mindset. Okay. And that is the general rule of thumb I've enjoyed is 4 years on those pieces of equipment. So if we're looking at just the computers for the medical practice, for the front desk and the staff, a 4-year replacement cycle is probably a safe bet, or partial. Maybe if you've got 10 or 20 computers in the clinic, you're going to try and replace a rotating group of 4 or 5 once you hit that 4-year mark. Software is, you can get yourself a few years off of it, as you know, from Microsoft Office and the various versions that come out. We know that when health systems go towards different browsers, right, across the enterprise, it's a very careful move to do that. So I like 4 years. That's an
Okay.
awfully broad statement. It depends on the technology. But if you're looking at lasers, arthroscopy, surgical equipment, things of that nature, dialysis machines, you're looking at a 3 to 5 year window. If you're looking at MRIs, larger piece of equipment, you're probably going to try and extend that life through the 7 to 10 year mark even. But that is hinges on the ability for the software to be updated without the actual physical equipment. We also talk about the lifespan of a warranty and what really falls under the warranty, what's really covered during the life, whether it's a lease or a purchase. How do you address the warranty considerations? What happens if that piece of equipment goes down? Whether it's leased or purchased, how do you minimize disruption to patient care? Right? And so we get into all of that in the presentation.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the term compliance previously. So let's
Yeah.
look at that. What are some of those potential compliance risks, and how do you safeguard against it?
Yeah, great question. Definitely a hot topic right now with companies that are associating. So, the consumable agreements aren't necessarily that new. They've just become a little bit more prolific. And the challenge you have is that you have to make sure. So, a consumable agreement, let's just make it very generic, and let's just say we have a piece of equipment that we utilize supplies in which to operate it, right? If we're using an MRI, we use contrast and other supplies and IV supplies and things like that too, as part of it. So those are consumable items. What will happen is under a consumable agreement, they'll say, okay, maybe we'll give you the piece of equipment at a discounted price or at a aggressively lower lease, as long as you are using our consumable products and use more of them, right? There's the key word. If you use more of them, now what we're looking at is an inducement, right?
Okay.
We're saying, hey, we'll give you a great deal if you'll use more supplies. And so that's where you're going to run into some compliance issues. For me, I use a general rule of thumb that over the past 36 months, what have the consumable trends be? So if a medical practice buys $50,000 worth of consumable product, and it was 52 the year before, 49 the year before that, and the new consumable agreement says our expectation is that you consume $50,000 worth of product again, then anything you do should be obviously legal, compliant, and defendable based on fair market value, right? So those are some of the touchy points over the compliance considerations, and that you just need to run it by. There's actually the concern is on both sides of the fence, right? The vendors are large, often very large corporations themselves now, and the McKesson and all of those types of companies. So they want to do things the right way as well. But you just got to be cognizant of that to make sure that any consignment agreement or consumable agreement has been vetted by your attorneys.
Let's talk about those smaller or independent practices. They may not have the same capital that some of their other practices, those larger practices or corporate-owned practices might be. So how can they be strategic and make sure that they have the necessary technology and equipment in place to serve their patient population?
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, I'll state that you'd be surprised that large integrated healthcare systems with large medical groups, right, even though they have a strong financial position on paper, they're often very aggressive in managing their expenses as well, right? So in the independent practice, the smaller practices, the 5 or 6 primary care network practice in a community, which I'm a huge fan of and staunch supporter of, they aren't going to necessarily have access to the large amount of capital that a bigger system is, like you just said. In that case, I'm a fan of consumable agreements, or I'm a fan of limited lease agreements that can with a lease to buy, and that they can purchase that equipment or own it at the end of of the lease. 5, 6, 7 year leases, I mean, just strongly shy away from. It's like leasing a car, right? I mean, after 3 years, it's probably become, not as in vogue or got enough miles on it, and it's probably time to either trade it in or you sure hope you got some residual value for it. So for medical practices that are more capital constrained, I'm a fan of very limited leases that have extended coverage on them from a warranty and service standpoint, and then anticipate what your needs will be next. Is it time for an updated piece of technology or equipment associated with that, or is it works fine and now you can either keep it, you pay it off for $1 and you own it. So really on a case by case basis, you got to examine each one.
Right. Now, you have a lot of variety in the experience that you've had. You've been in both private and academic healthcare settings. Does the strategy change at all? What does that look like?
Well, I would submit to you that my experiences in private practice and in non-teaching settings seem to be a little bit more nimble. They can move a little bit more efficiently. But there's something very gratifying to be in a large tertiary quaternary hospital where you're surrounded by nursing students, physical therapy students, radiology technology students, medical students, resident physicians in training. There's just a great buzz and energy that goes with being at a large academic center. But it's more complicated as well, right? Because in that case, if you're really fulfilling your mission of being a teacher, a teaching institution, then you have an obligation to try and expose those students and those healthcare professionals in training to a broad array of technologies, right? And that comes with expensive price tag as well. So, for example, in my current employer, we have teaching programs in 2 different markets, very robust, big teaching programs. And one of our interests is on surgical robotics, which are typically very expensive. Da Vinci robots, Cori robots, Rosa robots. And so what we do is rather than just have one, we have a series of those robots so that the physicians in training get exposure as much as possible to a wide array of medical equipment.
Okay. Last question then. If you just had one takeaway you want our medical practice leaders to take away regarding medical practice, equipment acquisition, what would that be?
Objectivity and value proposition. I would be disingenuous if I didn't tell you I've made some bad purchases in my day, and they've been driven by emotion, wanting to have the latest and greatest technology, or what have you, or influenced by a physician who wanted a new handheld ultrasound machine. Mm-hmm. And then, it clearly was not in our best interest to do it. So for me, it's take some of the tools that I've learned from my colleagues that I'll incorporate into the presentation, but really meticulously look through all of the key components of whether or not to buy or not to buy a piece of medical equipment, and make sure that it's consensus driven and not just you, that you've got a good consensus of the constituents in your medical practice, and then you're making the most informed decision possible. So that would be my takeaway.
All right. Well, Les Jepson, it has been such a pleasure to get you on the MGMA podcast.
Dan, always good to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah. So Les, just as a reminder, he's going to be speaking at MGMA's financial conference. It's going to be Monday, April 14th. And Les, correct me if I'm not wrong here, 7:30 a.m. Did you request that?
Bright and early. We got to rock and roll, and we'll make sure everybody's fully caffeinated and ready to jump into buy or not to buy a new piece of medical equipment.
That is awesome. Well, everybody, I'm going to provide a direct link to registration for the financial conference in the episode show notes. So until then, thank you all for being MGMA podcast listeners.